Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astrology University podcast. And this is the Cosmic Eye Forecast, which we do every month, where we look at the sun changing signs. And so this month, we're looking at Gemini season. And I have Vanessa Montgomery with me as my co host today. Welcome, Vanessa.
Hey, Tony, how are you today? And happy Gemini season. Also, twinning is winning.
I love it. Twinning is winning. I wish we could have the same tie or something like that today.
I know. Well, we've got our little checks on, our little shirts, and I knew that we'd show up with something that has some sort of twinning vibe on it. So that's a good motto for this month generally. Twinning is winning. Find your inner twin as well. Find your inner twin, not like looking externally for your twin flame, but also note, like, it's a fun little observance to note, like, when you show up twinning with people and you're sort of on that same page, which happens sometimes. It's quite fun. And let's talk a little bit about Gemini. So Gemini season, sun's gone into Gemini, the sign of the twin. It's mutable, personal, air. So communication, fast movement, newsrooms. I went into News Corp once, and it was amazing. It was like Clark Kent, like you see in the Superman movies, and everyone's so busy with their little journalist hat on. And I've probably said this before because the Cosmic Eye report is now a year old. So we've done Gemini once before.
So cool. I can't believe it's
Tony,
been a year.
Happy birthday. I know.
It's amazing.
I've loved our monthly meetups. So the Cosmic Eye is a Gemini. So, and I just see it as the news, the reporter, the journalist. So in News Corp, this massive building in Sydney, it's got levels and levels and levels of newsrooms and little studios. And it was the most fascinating insight because the energy in there was so mercurial. It was so fast. It was like so data driven, like go, go, go. Everyone typing at their little computer. It was just very no frills. There was no beauty about it. There was no Venus. It was all Mercury. It was all Gemini. They were all plugged in, and it was very exciting. And it's funny, I've just had them contact me yesterday, just on approach to Gemini season to offer me another job or talk about it. And I just think, what's the timing like with that? It's amazing. So the other thing I really wanted to share was I kept coming up with that saying that we all know, the pen is mightier than the sword. And I thought, well, interesting, that's coming for Gemini season. What is the chance that it was a Gemini that said that? So I get on the Google. Okay, who said that? The guy was a Gemini. So he had Sun and Mercury in Gemini. He was a novelist and playwright called Edward Bulwer Lytton. And it was in 1839 in a play that he wrote. So anything to say there, Tony?
It's just so cool. I love when you look stuff up, when you get an idea like that and you look it up and there it is. It's so amazing.
Yeah, right. It happens so much. So that's a good reminder too. And that other side of Gemini, which is there's the rational mind, but the other twin is the spiritual side or the subconscious or wherever that information's coming from. It's throwing you a ball, catch it and go with it and look it up. Like, why is that coming to me now? Let's just follow that little, rabbit hole through that, like we can, because we have the internet and Google, Gemini's best friend. So Gemini rules the hands, of course. And so there's a big focus on that. And I think it's interesting with, now we can't talk about Gemini at the moment without talking about the North Node in Gemini. And what are we all doing? We're so focused on our hands and what our hands are doing with, like, wash them, keep them clean. What are you touching? Don't touch your face. And of course, again, that typing and writing and getting that communication out with the hands, the nonverbal communication, which again is the other twin. And, that idea of Castor and Pollux. Pollux was the twin that was immortal. So I think that first thought, best thought, that unconscious, you don't know where you got that information from, is like the Pollux twin, what's coming to you. So a good month to just look, like, give a little bit of observance, like focus on, observe, just sort of see Gemini themes, what comes up, the mercurial side, how that enters your life, how you receive information, how you catch that information that comes to you. Do you just kind of ignore it, or do you say, I'm just going to follow that up? Because if you can get onto that practice, you are really winning, if you ask me. with the twinning, with your own like inner immortal twin. So it's also all about the cheeky trickster, which is, they're so quick as a whip, flirtatious, witty, so witty, fun, but also so naughty, because that Gemini, looking at all sides of things, will try to find all the different ways to do something. If they can't do it one way, it'll look at doing it the other way. So for you also, if you come up to an obstacle, or maybe just look at, well, what's 3 takes on this? Like, always go for the 3rd take. Is there another way of looking at this? And something else I found was, 2020 was the year of the puzzle and the games. Like, sales really peaked. They were starting to go up anyway in the 2 years prior, but they totally peaked. And I've always seen puzzles as a Gemini thing, because they like to solve riddles. They love riddles because it gives their mind something to work on. So in the Great Depression, puzzles also spiked. So I just think that's interesting. Again, the North Node's in Gemini now. And it's something that we need to turn our mind to things that keep it stimulated, solve problems. And, it's sort of a lighter, easier fix with Gemini. It's not necessarily the world's problems, but it can be applied to anything. So focus it on what you want to apply it to, or it will just go onto anything and cause mischief if it's not directed, which is the trickster bit. Will start playing tricks on you as well. And our mind does play tricks on us, which is so true. So anything else to add to that before we go to the pitfalls? That's a bit of a segue anyway to pitfalls, Tony.
No, that was great. That was great. I been reading a book on the trickster archetype, which has been really wonderful. So I could launch into that, but I've got a bunch to say later. So I'm going to reel myself in uncharacteristically. Yeah.
Well, you did say, I think last month's book recommendation might have been the trickster one. So that's a great one to revisit. Absolutely, for Gemini season. It's such a strong archetype. So pitfalls, again, the naughty side of the trickster. It can be the nervous system as well. You really need to take care of that and get grounded because of that quick air and light and lifting. Like, make sure you eat some like warm soups or root vegetables, things that are perhaps heavier and cooked to keep that nervous system okay. Too much information input as well, that is so easy for us these days. It's very stimulating, which can tip you over to unbalanced. It chews up a lot of blood as well in terms of health, like your mind chewing up all that energy chews up the iron in the blood and things like that. So just be aware of that. Being flaky can be very flaky. Then that dry, literally flaky. And the gossip side as well, the rumors circulating so quickly, check facts. And also, I have so many Geminis that say they've just been diagnosed with ADD, attention deficit disorder. And I always say, no, you're just a Gemini. But then they want the diagnosis, so they don't like that. But I'm just like, you need to do those things that ground you and apply the discipline that it takes to pull yourself back. And if you just go with like sometimes your sign too relentlessly, it can unbalance you regardless of what that sign is. So for Gemini, the discipline really has to be around following things through. But then the superpower is to cover a lot of ground, so finding a balance there. So classic signs, we don't have a big section on this, but I am saying Russell Brand because he is the ultimate wordsmith. And I say him probably every time, but he just he astounds me. And I think he's, if you read the feedback on anything he makes, it's people are just constantly saying, oh my God, your way with words, it's incredible. And it just continues. It's like there's no end to it. So he is, to me, like a real classic study on Gemini. And he says, he's obviously infinitely quotable. So one of his quotes I've chosen is, the only revolution that can really change the world is the one in your own consciousness. So using that mercurial ability and the intellect to come back into your own consciousness and work from there. And my other one was, my classic Gemini is Twitter. It's not actually a Gemini, but It's literally, you know, air sign. It's a little blue bird. There's Twitter storms. Like the movement is so fast. You have such a limited, finite number of letters you can use, which as the opposite sign, Sagittarius, drives me nuts. So I don't like Twitter. And I think it's the opposite sign. I need to write a lot. And I want to read a lot. Like I want more depth. I want to read more, but it's so popular. There's, you know, Twitter, Astro Twitter, there's crypto Twitter, and there's such huge communities on there. Just buzzing. Things move quickly, and so it's short, it's brief, it's to the point, which, you know, is Gemini. It's an articulate sign, so, and it can get things out, very concisely, unlike the opposite Sagittarius. Which is something I struggle with sometimes because I like to just keep talking and reading and gathering information. So, yeah. So what about your classic signs, Tony?
Yeah, my classic Gemini is Miles Davis. He had Gemini rising, and his sun in Gemini was just above the ascendant. And he was a master of some Gemini gifts, including improvisation and versatility. He was constantly shifting styles, both in his personal appearance and in his music. You know, remember he has Gemini rising, and he liked to have his finger on the pulse of trends. And he had a rotating crew of bandmates as he went through some different cycles and trends with his music. And his band tended to get a bit younger even as he got older. So he would kind of, it's almost like his band stayed the same age by switching them out with the younger folks. He once shared an interesting piece of Gemini advice, and this is a short, kind of a one-liner, and I think Gemini is great with one-liners as well. And this one is, do not fear the mistakes, there are none. I really love that one. Just good food for thought. And some other Geminis that you might know and love, or not love, I guess, are Nicole Kidman, Kanye West, Macklemore, Jean-Paul Sartre, Annette Bening, Edward Snowden, and Harvey Milk. And I loved that group of people because there's just a lot of multiplicity there. You know, there's not like a common thread really. So I love that. So we are on to the monthly moon. So what's going on with the moon this month, Vanessa?
Well, we have obviously the eclipses coming up that you can read all about everywhere. So many different versions, which is Gemini, right? Like have a look at perspectives. I'm going to be recommending a couple of books as well that you can go to in our What's on Our Coffee Table. So the first moon that we have is a full moon in Sagittarius, of course, the opposite sign of Gemini. It's going to be at 5 degrees Sagittarius, and it is just in a couple of days, May 26th. And one thing with eclipses, some people might know, they happen in cycles, and it's called a Saros cycle. So Saros, and this one is Saros 121, and it's a total eclipse, so it should be spectacular. I've heard it's meant to be a supermoon as well, so whatever, you know, that's going to mean to you. Some people say and in one of my book recs, Bernadette Brady says they're real wild cards. So you can't actually predict if it's going to be like great and start something off and reset, or if it's just going to slam you, or you probably won't notice if it's not triggering a certain point, or, you know, particular planets or aspect sets in your own chart. So anything around 0 to 10 of the mutable signs, it's gonna let's just watch and see and observe. So what's happening with that? That one is, the last one was 18 years ago, because they travel in 18-year periods over hundreds and hundreds of years the cycles last. So the last one was May 1985. If there was anything significant then, it might be also significant this time. So interesting to think back to May 1985. 2003 was the last one, and before that was 1985. So 2003 May, and then 1985. So this one is in a T-square with Jupiter, and I thought that was interesting because, of course, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, so that's significant. So it's square the moon and the sun, forming that T-square, which at 1 degrees Pisces, Jupiter's at. So that's forcing for change. So what is the Jupiter saying to push through to? If it's in Pisces, I think that square, of course, is about, again, information and where you gain that information from, looking at the rational and judgment versus acceptance and, the oneness and the union, and finding the luck in that. Also, the Jupiter square anything can just mean you are potentially going to really overdo something, or something's overdone. So just look at those. It's trine Chiron, so easy flow to Chiron in Aries, for getting your action on, taking action, taking like independence as well, maybe independent thought in this case. Of course, it's conjunct the nodes, like they do travel near the nodes, the eclipses. So this one is in orb. So I just think that gives it more of when I think about it, I think of like a vortex opening up. And if it's a reset, you can throw your junk into it and then just close the door. Or you can throw some people say don't do magic or spells or set the intentions. But I think, oh, well, why not play the wild card and throw something into that vortex and see what comes out? You never know. So I'll be doing a bit of both personally, since it's on my sun, and not doing anything risky that day. And then we have the new moon at 19 Gemini. That's around the 10th. Yeah, that's the 10th of June. And that's conjunct the ruler Mercury. So we've got for both a rulership link, which is interesting, but Mercury's retrograde in sign. So currently we're in retro shade, but we'll talk about that later. So sun and moon in Gemini, set your intentions. Oh, also it has an eclipse though. So it's up to you about how you want to use that or not use it. There's an eclipse, which is an annular eclipse. So they're the more spectacular ones with the ring around them. If you're somewhere where you can see that. And it's square to Neptune. So again, there's this Neptune in sign, this square between that real rational mind and that absolutely not rational, can't prove it, where are you getting your information from, plus the compassion that comes along with that. So perhaps these two things are being challenged at the moment, and it's time to find some kind of way to get them to meet and have your facts and data, but somehow work with the compassion and thought for others, not just what ticks a box. So that is the monthly moons. And so next we have Tony. Why don't you give us the headlines? What are the key signatures for this month? Have we got anything really going to rock us out?
Well, yes, there is a lot going on this Gemini season. So we have another exact square. It's actually the second one between Saturn and Uranus. We've been talking about that in every podcast. We also have Mercury retrograde in Gemini. And while it's retrograde, it's going to be squaring Neptune, important thing that we'll focus on in just a little bit. And also those solar eclipses on the Gemini-Sag axis. So a lot going on. The big aspect all year, as I said, is still the Saturn in Aquarius square Uranus in Taurus. And that second exact pass happens on June 14th from 13 degrees Aquarius to 13 degrees Taurus. So if those are sensitive degrees in your chart, you want to kind of take a look at that. In previous podcasts, I've talked about the tension between Saturn regulation, for instance, and Uranian rebellion. And we've been seeing this play out in the collective in a number of ways. One of the easiest to see is in the public reaction in the US to the various shifting guidelines that are being set by the CDC concerning regulations, COVID regulations, whether that's about vaccines or mask wearing. Last year, as COVID began to spread, mask wearing was politicized by the radical right here in the US, which led to an increasingly polarized tension, just as Saturn and Uranus were coming into range of the square. Really dynamic expression of that aspect, and we're going to see more of that this year. And at that time, the rallying cry was Uranian. People were saying, you can't take away my personal freedom by making me wear a mask. Whereas the Saturn response was, since when did protecting yourself and those in your community become an issue of personal freedom? And then mask mandates were put into place in various jurisdictions. So Saturn kind of got the last word there to some extent, although there was definitely some rebellion in response. On the Saturn side, the laws were created to enforce behavior and to protect others from harm. in the best instances. And I think we have to say that in some cases, we probably went a little too far with that corrective. But on the Uranian side, resistance and rebellion against those laws was also notable. So we're seeing this just play out in the collective, this eternal story that gets told by the movement of the planets. Astrology is just so cool that way. For advice about how to work with these tensions on a personal level, I'm going to repeat what I said last month, which is that squares can describe internal and external tensions that I think we're meant to rumble with. Sometimes we can find resolution between those two, sometimes disparate energies, and other times not so much resolution as a creative and conscious response that's hopefully guided by a combination of our intuition, our feelings, and our intentional thought process. In other words, it takes a lot of work and focus. Each of us has to engage with these energies in our own way. And this is especially true if the square is making a tight aspect to an important feature in your own chart. For instance, those of you who have natal Saturn in Aquarius in the early to mid degrees, well, you've been having your Saturn return. Maybe it's your first Saturn return, maybe it's your second Saturn return, and you've also signed up for some astro extra credit because of that square with Uranus. So not only are you having the Saturn return, but as you're working through that process that's indicated by this important life cycle milestone, you also have to contend with whatever curveballs Uranus is hurling your way. I've been working through some of this in my Saturn Return Bootcamp experience, which is a group coaching experience that I set up to work with people who are going through their Saturn return. And it's been really interesting to see what's unfolding for this specific group of folks who have Saturn in Aquarius natally. And in some cases, a Uranian liberating event or impulse is paving the way for them to get clarity about that Saturn process of narrowing focus, right? And kind of choosing where to go next. It's fascinating stuff. But wherever this transit lands in your chart, if you find yourself at the far end of one of those spectrums, either too much Saturn or too much Uranus, you might find that the work lies in reflecting on your own fixed ideas or biases, because these planets are both in fixed signs. So where are you planting your feet in the sand because you're just refusing to budge because you think you're right? And what if you're not right? It's a nice question to ask while we have this Gemini season, right? What if you weren't right? On the Uranus end, since Uranus is in Taurus, the antidote could be injecting just a little bit of questioning and digging deeper than you're inclined to. So bringing in a little bit of that Scorpio polarity. Another thing to think about with Uranus in Taurus is if it sounds too simple, it probably is. On the Saturn end, since Saturn's in Aquarius, what happens when you get out of your head, your conceptions, your detached observations, or rigid adherence to authoritative rules or guidelines, and warm up to the individual humans that are just trying to shine their own light? So taking in a little bit of that Leo polarity. Last month, I talked about Mars out of bounds, which is very, very important because Mars has been out of bounds for almost 2 months. And as we speak, Mars will come back out of its peak of declination on May 24th. Depending on your time zone. It's kind of awkward that we called this Mars out of bounds because we have another technique in astrology where we use the phrase bounds, and when we say in bounds, it kind of sometimes makes you think of something else. So we have to come up with a term for when Mars goes, I just say comes out of its peak. So, but check out last month's podcast to learn more about that if you want to hear more. I want to put out a hopeful vision that we see a de-escalation of violence as Mars comes out of that peak of declination, both in the gun violence in the US and also in the tragic Israel-Palestine conflict that's been ongoing and is kind of amped up while Mars has been out of bounds. There are calls for that now happening all over the globe, and good people are putting a lot of effort in to make that happen. So hopefully we'll witness a little progress there after May 24th. Now, of course, the tension behind that conflict isn't going away anytime soon. And the Saturn-Uranus square tells us that there are no easy resolutions this year, and that we'll still have to wrestle with those energies in a big way all year. It's possible that we see Saturn winning most of these rumble matches because Saturn's in a sign that it rules in Aquarius, but Uranus is still going to do its best to demand liberation and personal freedom in the face of Saturn restrictions. On June 11th, Mars moves into Leo, changing the expression of Mars from its more defensive position in Cancer, where it's been for a while, to a more assertive one in this fire sign. Leo warms up Mars and it increases its capacity for play and joy, but it can also elevate the ego. So you want to watch out there for better or worse, right? Mercury stations retrograde on May 29th in Gemini. And rather than repeat the usual Mercury lore for you, I want to point out a couple of unique qualities about this particular Mercury retrograde cycle and share a little bit about retrograde in the context of Mercury's relationship to the sun. So first, Mercury being retrograde in a sign of its rulership is important to focus on. It's in Gemini. So Mercury, which relates to our communicative function, is now colored by all things Gemini. And that includes everything Vanessa led us through earlier, and also multiplicity, duality, amorality. That's a great Gemini word. Restlessness, and even mischief, as Vanessa was explaining. So put your focus on communication and movement during this period to be aware of the classic retrograde pitfalls. This is especially true because Mercury will also be squaring Neptune throughout the retrograde. Now, when Mercury squares Neptunes, I often get calls from clients, or emails rather, who are asking me, is Mercury retrograde? Like, what's going on? Because it sure feels like it, because that transit of Mercury in aspect to Neptune can cloud up Mercury's sharpness. Things get lost in translation, or just plain lost. There's a creative opportunity, though, in this aspect, especially if you're a fantasy writer, but many other situations too. But it doesn't tend to work if we're really pushing for clarity and objectivity. We have to do a little bit of that rumbling, that square rumbling with these two planets here to get them to work together. So there's a real tension between Mercury and Gemini, especially because it's square Neptune in Pisces, right? So that's like a really solid archetype of Mercury in Gemini and a really solid archetype of Neptune in Pisces, and they're really at odds with each other. Neptune in Pisces has nothing to do with objectivity. So this Mercury Neptune aspect is exact on May 22nd, just before the station retrograde, and again on June 5th during the retrograde, and once more on July 6th after the retrograde. Normally Mercury's moving so fast that we just get this aspect for a couple of days, but because of the retrograde, we're getting it several times. So very important to take stock of this month. My advice for you, my friends, is to slow down and invite in your intuition just as much as your rational thinking, and see if you can get the two to work together somehow. I know that's hard to think about. It's hard for me to imagine too. But that's what a square is all about. Be patient and give this process as much time as you need. You might not have access to the objective truth while these two planets are in aspect as much as Mercury and Gemini would like it, and the facts might be obscured in some way. So tread carefully. Don't get too dogmatic or hung up on whatever idea it is that you're attached to. If you have to take action based on what you think you know, there will be times during this transit and this month when your best resource is going to be your intuition. Lastly, I just want to point to something we don't talk about quite enough, which is that Mercury retrograde takes place at the end and marks the beginning of the Sun-Mercury cycle. As Mercury stations retrograde, we need to consciously reflect on and tie up loose ends because we're in the closing part of this cycle. In this period, some mercurial process that you've been chewing on is wrapping up. Could be some thought process you've been working on over the last 3 months, for instance. In the middle of the retrograde, Mercury makes what we call an inferior conjunction with the Sun. It's when it gets closest to the Earth, and this marks the end of the cycle and the start of a new one, just like a new moon. So at this time, a seed gets planted, and this happens right in the middle of the retrograde, and that seed might have something to do with your evolving sense of self and identity because of Mercury's relationship to the Sun. So new avenues will be explored over the next few months as you let your curiosity guide you. Follow your curiosity. But the seed moment at this time points to that potential. So it's unrealized potential at this point. Just like the new moon, it's where it's like the darkest part of the moon. It's the unknown moment in the Mercury cycle that's also full of potential. So Mercury's still retrograde during this time, but so it's a good time to prepare the ground for that seed to grow once Mercury does move direct and forward and starts to move away from the Sun a bit. So that's all I have time to share about this for now. But if you'd like to learn more about this whole cycle, I go into great detail about all of it in my webinar, Mercury Phases, the Hidden Dimension. So check that out if you're interested. When observed in the context of the Sun-Mercury relationship, there's more than meets the eye. On May 23rd, Saturn stations retrograde. The outer planet stations intensify the energy of that planet for about a month, so a couple of weeks on either side of this date. So Saturn's already been slowing down even as we speak. The Saturn station takes place at 13 Aquarius, and if that number sounds familiar, it's the same degree that the exact square with Uranus takes place this month that I mentioned earlier. So this is a powerhouse station. Saturn's like really planting its feet in the sand and getting strong, right? As it comes to that what looks like to us stillness. If this is an important degree in your chart, that 13 degrees, take note. It could be time to activate your Saturn vibes in a big way. And that could mean getting responsible, doing the right thing, or making the more mature decision if you're on the fence about something. So just kind of in order to figure out which choice would be a little bit more mature, a little bit more of a grown-up choice, whatever that means to you. Finally, we have two important ingresses in May, and on June 2nd, Venus enters Cancer, and Mars on June 11th, Mars enters Leo. Vanessa, do you have anything you'd like to share about either of those?
No, I think you covered it really well. And I've actually just gone off on a tangent. I may as well say it here with the Gemini, and that we've happened to twin again. And I was thinking about the checks because in Bali, you know, I live in Australia and close to us is Bali. And there's a black and white checkered cloth called poleng that it's everywhere. If you've ever been there or Google it, you'll see this cloth. And it's the meaning behind it is basically the polarity of like the different layers of the universe. And it's that yin yang idea, which is Gemini, that there's not ever one thing, there's not ever one truth. Look at all the sides because there's black, there's white, there's yin, there's yang, there's a little bit of everything and everything, depending on what view you take. So the fact that we wore our checks, I think that we were right on the mark.
Awesome.
That was a tangent, but yes, you covered it. Great job.
We have to do at least one tangent while we're talking about Gemini season. It just wouldn't be right if we didn't.
Right. And we're mutable. And Tony, you have Gemini rising. So it's definitely your duty to tangent for Gemini season.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier when we were talking about what we were wearing, and I was like, it's pretty easy for me to dress like a Gemini rising because I am one. So
right,
exactly. Whatever I'm wearing, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the declination report. And during Gemini season this year, we're going to get heavy out of bounds action. And you know that I love talking about that. But this is a real rare out of bounds peak moment where we get several planets out of bounds at once. And that doesn't happen often when they're out of bounds so close together. It happens that Mercury, Venus, and Mars go out of bounds every year, but not usually right at the same time. As we start this Gemini season on May 21st, Mars is out of bounds still. It's been out of bounds for a while through May 25th. Mercury's also been out of bounds and it stays out of bounds and through May 30th. So we've got Mercury and Mars out of bounds right now. Venus joins in the out of bounds fun on May 24th and stays out of bounds through June 18th. And then the moon goes out of bounds twice as it's been doing this year before the sun moves into Cancer next month and again shortly. So we talked about Mars and Mercury out of bounds last month. So revisit that podcast for some thoughts on that, or check out my recent webinar that I did on Mercury out of bounds. That was a lot of fun and full of some really inspiring examples. But I want to just call your attention to a couple of hotspot dates here. First is that overlap I mentioned between Mars and Mercury out of bounds between the 21st and 25th, and when Mercury and Mars are out of bounds at the same time. If you took action recently on a new idea, maybe in the last couple of weeks, that seems a little bit wild or a little bit out there, maybe you're even aware of that, you may find yourself coming back down to Earth a bit soon when both of those planets come back in a normal range of declination. There's a creative opportunity, though, when Mercury and Venus are out of bounds together, which happens just after Mars comes back in. And those dates are May 24th through May 30th. So that nice Mercury and Venus combo. And there's a special emphasis here on May 28th to 30th, because that's the first time in our period here where the moon is also out of bounds. So you have moon, Mercury, and Venus all out of bounds at the same time from May 28th to 30th. Really, really peak declination moment of this year. The moon's going to be in Capricorn and Aquarius over those few days. Those are normally more reserved sign placements for the moon, but this time the feels get amplified by the out of bounds placement of the moon. This can be wonderful if you're working on a creative project that also requires an injection of heart and soul, and that's just blending all three of those planets together. There's a really nice mix here of head and heart energy that you can tap into on those dates. And of course, all the usual out of bounds qualities of like thinking outside the box and coming from that place of unchecked expression of the planetary energies, that kind of freedom place with Venus and Mercury. The other moon out of bounds dates this month are June 11th to 14th, when the moon will be in Gemini and Cancer. I talk about parallel aspects every month as well, if there are any, and we have one this month that's worth noting. And parallel aspects can be interpreted sort of like conjunctions, but they're especially important when they coincide with conjunctions, which is the case when Mercury and Venus are conjunct and parallel this month. And it's actually pretty rare for out of bounds planets to be parallel, because when planets get that high, the orb that you have to use for them to be parallel is actually 25 minutes. So if you're an astrologer, that's a tiny, tiny orb. And Mercury and Venus accomplish that. And that date's on May 28th, while they're both out of bounds, when Mercury and Venus will also form that parallel, enhancing their creative potential. And this is a must set aside day for verbal creativity. So writers, take note. Definitely mark that date off for some writing time, because amazing things could happen. And now it's time for our nonprofit break. Each month we feature a nonprofit on our podcast that we support with a donation, and we encourage you to do so as well. So tap into your Neptune and Pisces compassion and consider supporting the Vera Institute of Justice. Their mission is to end overcriminalization and mass incarceration of people of color, immigrants, and people experiencing poverty. They envision a future with safe, healthy, empowered communities and a fair, accountable justice system. Definitely something worth working towards. The US justice system is in need of reform. While the US makes up 5% of the world's population, it incarcerates 25% of the world's people, more than any other country. People of color make up an estimated 30% of the population in the US, while they make up 60% of the US prison population. Something about those numbers is askew. To instigate change, the Vera Institute works in partnership with local, state, and national government officials to create change from within. They study problems that impede human dignity and justice. They pilot solutions that are at once transformative and achievable. And they engage diverse communities in informed debate, while also harnessing the power of evidence to drive effective policy and practice. So I hope that you'll join us this month in supporting their mission, and you can do that by heading over to their website and making a donation at vera.org. That's vera.org. We have a very easy website to talk about this month. And that brings us to Opportunity Knocks. Well, I just have one opportunity transit to focus on this month, and that's Venus trine Jupiter on June 2nd and 3rd. It's a really good one. If we just have one, we might pick that one, right? So this is a classic aspect of ease and flow, creative expansion, and positive supportive growth. These two are also in water signs, and Jupiter's in rulership in Pisces. So there's some really great qualities to tap into with that particular aspect. Now, when thinking about electional days this month, or even thinking about that day as an electional, if you want to use that aspect to take an important action, my advice is to do so on the 2nd or before 4 a.m. Pacific time on June 3rd, after which all bets are off due to other things going on. I wouldn't call the 2nd a great electional date for something that's really important, since the moon's in its waning phase and there are other indicators, like I mentioned, that aren't really in a state of flow. But sometimes our choices are extremely limited, and you just have to choose the best that you can get. So that might be a date to kind of highlight if that's you. There are no standout electionals this month that are really great. But the other mixed bag days that have like a little bit of flow in the midst of challenging aspects are June 19th and 20th, where you can tap into an implying trine from the sun or moon to Jupiter. And there's also a trine between Venus and Neptune, which could be good for a creative, dreamy kind of intention. And these all take place on the 19th and 20th, while they're under that waxing moon phase, which is my favorite time for electionals. The hard aspects that on that day include an applying opposition from Mars to Saturn, and those need to be taken into account when you're making your choices if you're choosing your own electionals and trying to find a good rising sign. And that takes us to what's on your coffee table. So what are you reading this month, Vanessa?
Well, I'm actually catching up on a lot of things, but since the eclipses are back, I've bought out these two books, which is The Eagle and the Lark, Predictive Astrology by Bernadette Brady, has a section further to the back all about eclipses and the Saros cycles, and it has a whole listing of things for each cycle. Quite interesting, different viewpoints. She's a really great Australian astrologer that's been teaching forever. So worth a look in. And one that I've mentioned before that I just happened to find on a random astrology sale table of an old book, which is the Book of Eclipse by David Overson. And he's quite a fun researcher. So that's just a really interesting read, actually. And there's all these really great old woodcuts and images that the ancients used to use to depict their idea of eclipses and also the alchemical side of it. So a really good read, The Book of Eclipses by David Overson. And what about
Nice.
you, Tony? What's on your coffee table this month?
Well, interestingly enough, I've got kind of a technique book too, which is Astrology: A Language of Life, Volume 1 on Progressions by Robert Blaschke. And this one kind of nerds out on progression techniques. So it's not just secondary progressions, but also tertiary progressions and minor progressions. And he has this whole kind of pet system for working with the three of them together. So very fascinating, but it takes a little bit of brain juice to to follow along with, for sure. So what are your takeaways for this month for all of these crazy cycles?
Well, just the straight up Gemini good advice of looking at both sides of the coin and remembering polarity and finding that middle point at least. And if you're strong on one side, then you must find the equal amount of the other side to find that middle point. Because we've talked about this before, the polarity of last year and this year is just so divisive, and it's just really important to remember that Gemini, what Gemini teaches us and is represents as an archetype, the zodiac and astrology, it's all just like a system to show us the archetypes as well, is that polarity. One of the earlier images was Janus, a figure with literally two faces.
Janus,
the
yeah,
two-faced side of Gemini it's looking in Janus was looking in two directions, or you could even have three, but usually it's two, and it's also symbolized by the coin with the two faces on it. There's always another side. So at least find yourself another side, another perspective, another voice to open it up and find another aspect of truth, which is then you've got the opposite Sagittarius coming in. So look at both sides of the argument or the coin. Use your other face. What about you, Tony? What's your key takeaway?
Well, I was thinking this month would be a good time to kind of navigate into that sweet spot between authority and anarchy, whatever that means for you, even if it's just in your own psyche. Now, some of you will see that playing out, of course, in real time. And as you explore that Saturn side, it's a good time to notice if you're being too hardcore with your judgment of other people's choices. And you know what I'm talking about. People have opinions about the mask thing, right? So whatever your opinions are, notice where you're being too hardcore, and also notice where you might be enacting that side of Uranus where you're a rebel without a grounded reason. So that rebel without a cause thing, I guess. But if we're putting it into the context of Uranus and Taurus, I really like rebel without a grounded reason. This is also a good month to slow down, to reflect on the last 3 months, to collect your thoughts, to organize your desk mess, to respond to old emails. Here's a practical Virgo tip. Start with your oldest email first instead of your newest. I mean, I'm just assuming that you all do what I do and you try to hit the new ones first, but reverse it, in Mercury retrograde, start with the old ones and clear some of those out. It'll feel really good, I promise. Also a great time to do a bit of mental house cleaning and prepare for the next 3 months of the Mercury cycle after the retrograde. So clearing that space in your mind so that this new Mercury cycle can come in. So what do you have for us for monthly mantras?
Oh, there's so many mantras to choose from. So I am going to say, I easily find myself asking the correct questions that bring me the answers I seek.
Nice.
It's very Gemini. What
Short and
about you,
sweet.
Tony? Any mantra?
Yeah, I've got a couple here. My objective self and my intuitive self are friends. I like that one. Uh,
Yes.
uh, and then I have I seek the answers and the facts while holding space for the magic and mystical.
Yeah. Great
Oh,
use of the square that's coming in.
yeah. And it looks like I have one more. I seek wisdom for moving into the present by reviewing the past. Beautiful. Well, that takes us to the end of our session today. And I'd like to tell you about a few things coming up at Astrology University. On May 22nd, 2021, Stephen Forrest joins us to talk about the Pluto return. And we invited Stephen because Pluto is one of his favorite topics, and he also loves talking about the United States and transits the United States chart. So he's going to give some insights about the US Pluto return. And this is presented in the form of an audio talk that he's already recorded and is available to listen to right now. And then he'll be joining us for a live question and answer session on May 22nd. So head over and download his talk now, and then you can join us for that Q&A session on May 27th and ask all of your questions about the US Pluto return, which is a hot topic right now. I noticed when we posted it in our Astrology University Facebook group, a lot of heated discussion came up on that one. On June 2nd, we start a brand new course with Mark Jones. Really excited to have him teaching the Lunar Nodes 101. It's been a while since Mark went back to the basics with this technique. He's been spending several years going through some really specific aspects to the nodes and specific placements. But for those of you who are just learning about the nodes, this course is for you. And you're going to be introduced to the lunar nodes from Mark Jones's evolutionary and humanistic perspective. He's going to share his technique for interpreting the nodes of the moon, which are derived from the techniques of the teachings of Dane Rudhyar in conjunction with insights that Mark's gained from his years of work counseling others as a licensed therapist. The nodes can be approached as a doorway to understanding our deepest life purpose in the context of a therapeutic emphasis on personal transformation. And Mark's going to present his core method and specific application of this technique, including the difference between the north and south node, how to analyze the rulers of the nodes, how to interpret planets in aspect to the nodes generally. He'll also cover how the north and the south nodes can work together. And then on June 5th, I'm very excited to announce a new webinar on a topic that has been blowing up on the internet and everywhere. And this one's called Cryptomania, a look from above and below. And we have trader and financial analyst Gianni DePoce, who's taking us through the world of cryptocurrency from a geocosmic and economic perspective. And by the way, geocosmic is just alias for astrology. Gianni brings nearly a decade of marketing experience to the table and has worked closely with renowned market timer and analyst and geocosmic analyst Ray Merriman, who some of you have heard of through his website, MMA Cycles. They have a very excellent free newsletter that I highly recommend you sign up for if you haven't, if you're interested in financial astrology. But Ray also covers the planetary cycles in a really lovely way each week as well. So there's mixed in with the financial advice, there's some nice little astro forecast in there too. But this crypto presentation that we're going to share with you is going to examine cryptocurrency from a cyclical standpoint as it relates to astrology, of course, as well as from a technical standpoint. So tune in to find out how the Uranus and Taurus monetary revolution could unfold. It's a topic a lot of us are thinking about this year. So I hope you can join us. And what's going on in your world this month, Vanessa?
Well, first I'll say those sound fantastic. A lot of really great stuff on the table at Astrology University this month. Well, for me, it's the usual because I'm doing a lot of just writing and other things. But what I'm available for is, well, buy my books, read my books, and you can schedule a reading with me because I'm still doing readings for astrology. I do synastry readings as well, which I really enjoy. And but you have to have permission from the other person, of course, or bring them along. It's better if you're both there, of course. It's a really great way to open up a conversation and also have a bit of an objective stance on it by using the astrology and the synastry. And of course, I mentioned last month, I'm doing past life regressions based on your lunar south node and what the lesson is, where you're meant to be directed to in the north. So that's very interesting. That's an interesting one. So you're welcome to book in to those on astroallstars.com. And that's it from me this month.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. So head over to your favorite bookseller and just type in Vanessa's name, Vanessa Montgomery, and grab her books. The second book just came out not too long ago, so Cosmic Power. So check that out. Really great to have you on the show, Vanessa. And until Cancer season, I will say goodbye for now and take good care, everyone.
Buckle up. Thanks, Tony, and have a great month, everyone. Stay cosmic.